Welcome back. Now, if you're a lover of fine wine, don't panic, but there are warnings of possible shortages this Christmas. A mixture of the supply crisis and Brexit means that bottles of your favourite Merlot, Malbec or Beaujolais may not be available. As a result, sommeliers and restaurateurs are urging some people to order by the glass and get more creative with their choices. Well, joining me now is Tom Berresford. He's Managing Director at Bermar. Tom, very good morning to you. Crikey, it's a Friday morning. We're trying to cheer people up as we head into the weekend. What are the wines that are going to be in scarce supply this Christmas?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on, Ian. And yes, certainly, as you allude to, I think we're staring down the barrel of some interesting times for the global wine industry. Much has been made already of potential Prosecco shortages, and I know that a lot of this relates to the harvest of last year and the challenges of harvest last year, and regions around the world, and notably Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, one of the nation's favourite wines. We're talking about yields that are down 30-40%. So certainly a few interesting months ahead.
So if people want to be more creative with their wine choices, what are the what can they easily substitute for some of the favourites that might not be so plentiful?
Sure, it's a good question. I think what we saw, one of the sort of few blessings for the hospitality industry of the last year's lockdowns, was that the great British public did sit at home and kind of fall back in love with wine. Bottle sales across all retail channels were at record highs. And we're now talking to perhaps a more adventurous consumer than we have been doing before. And I think consumers are probably more willing now to try new things and maybe to spend a little bit more and treat themselves this Christmas. So, I know a lot of New Zealand's producers are partnering with winemakers in South Africa, Chile, and other regions to kind of keep that iconic New Zealand style. But if I was giving some advice, I'd be saying, don't be afraid to branch out and try a glass of something new this Christmas.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned South Africa there. I mean, it's been widely reported the producers in South Africa had a really bad time of it during the pandemic. I mean, is that a producer that you'd really want people to get behind in this country right now?
It's absolutely. I mean, those guys had an incredibly tough lockdown with various bans on exporting of their wines over the last 18 months. And if we as a nation can get behind them and do our bit to drink more South African wine this Christmas, absolutely. There's some incredible producers down there now making astonishing wines. So I don't think you would be disappointed if you made a switch or an upsell into a glass of something South African.
What about the Chinese embargo on Australian wines? Does that mean more Australian wine is coming over here?
It certainly does, yeah. So that's it's an interesting position that a lot of Australian producers find themselves in. China's notoriously been a large market for Australian exports, and those wines now are making their way onto our supermarket shelves. And to pick up your earlier point, it means perhaps this Christmas we won't see a shortage of wine. I wouldn't want anyone thinking there won't be wine this Christmas. But I think what we're going to find is there's an imbalance, and that some regions, and particularly those who've been hit hardest by the impacts of Brexit, COVID and climate change and the crisis in harvests, they maybe won't be available, but you'll be substituting that for, there's obviously a significant amount of Australian wine now that needs to find a new home around the world.
You mentioned Brexit there. I mean, which are the sort of wine producers where you might see a drop-off in demand in this country because potentially prices are high? I mean, I'm assuming that mainly means France.
Yeah, I think you're going to find across Europe now that the prices continue to increase. Earlier in your programme, you were talking about inflation being rampant, and we see no signs of that slowing down in the wine world, not least of all with the impact that climate and the frosts, wet summers of the last couple of years have had in Europe. When yields are down 30-40%, that naturally is going to coincide with higher prices for us.
And it's the crush, as you say. I mean, the harvest has been quite poor this year.
It has, yeah. You may remember those images, some of the viewers might, from earlier in the year, the iconic images of winemakers lighting fires in the vineyards to try and keep the frost away, later in the spring as the vines were beginning to bud. So, yeah, it's been an incredibly challenging year for winemakers, fresh off the back of an incredibly challenging 18 months that preceded it. So, yeah, tough times. I think we will see some inflation coming through in the price of wine. But we obviously would encourage anyone and everyone who's out and about in the run-up to Christmas this year to just be a little bit braver, try something new, and you might be surprised by what you find.
All right, Tom Berresford, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Ian.
That's it from me. Next week, the programme's off air, I'm afraid to say. It's going to be an extended All Out Politics. And you can see All Out Politics coming up right now with Adam Bolton after this break. Cheerio.